In the summer of 1981, a quiet family in the countryside of Ohio found themselves stuck in something they could not explain. Their small farmhouse became the middle of a mystery that even investigators still cannot understand. What started with strange noises in the woods soon turned into nights filled with screams, flashing lights, and creatures that should not exist. This case was written down in an out-of-print book called Night Siege, written by researcher Dennis Pilichis. He and several witnesses saw the events with their own eyes, and even 40 years later, no one has been able to explain them. Robert and his family lived in a small farming town just outside Rome, Ohio. They lived simply, raised animals, and kept to themselves. But that summer, something came to their farm, something that did not act like any animal they had ever seen. It began with finding a deer torn open with surgical precision. Then feed bags were ripped up, animals went missing, and the nights became uneasy. Neighbors said it was coyotes. Robert was not so sure. One evening, his 16-year-old son woke up screaming, saying he had seen a face staring through his bedroom window. Everyone called it a nightmare. But within days, that nightmare became real. What the family would go through over the next several weeks goes against reason. Figures with glowing red eyes, impossible lights that floated above the trees, engines that stopped for no reason, and screams that echoed across the valley. Dennis and his team came to investigate, and what they found made the case one of the strangest in Ohio's history. Footprints that stopped mid-step, creatures that seemed to fade in and out of view, and evidence that pointed to something far beyond simple stories. This is the story of what happened that summer, a story about a family that faced something they could never understand and survived to tell it. This is the Night Siege of 1981. Robert never thought of himself as the kind of man who would end up in a story like this. He was a farmer born and raised in Ohio. Most days were spent feeding chickens, fixing fences, and keeping the place running. Life was quiet, expected, and that is how he liked it. But early that summer, things started to change. It began when one of his dogs stopped going near the woods. Normally they would chase anything that moved, but now they barked once and ran straight back to the porch. Then, Robert found the deer. It lay near the fence, torn open in a way that did not make sense. The cuts were too clean. The bones snapped too easily. He had hunted for years. He knew what coyotes did. This was not that. A few days later, a group of Amish men came to cut wood on the property. They left a pile of feed sacks beside their wagons. But when they returned the next morning, the bags were ripped apart and scattered like something had clawed through them. No prints, no blood, just torn cloth and grain covering the dirt. The men finished their work that day, but when Robert checked later in the week, their tools were still there. They had packed up and left without coming back. Not long after, one of Robert's horses came home bleeding from a wound along its side. He called it a snake bite, but deep down he knew that was not right. The cut was long and deep, as if made by sharp claws. Still, he said nothing. Maybe it was better not to ask questions he could not answer. Then came the gas crew. That June, a bulldozer operator working in the woods uncovered something he could not explain. A patch of ground 40 feet wide, completely bare. No grass, no rocks, nothing but smooth gray dirt. 2 large holes, each as wide as a drum, sank deep into the ground. The man told Robert about it, joked that he was paid to dig through, not around. He plowed straight over it. A few days later, the animals started disappearing. Ducks vanished from the pond, chickens from the coop. When Robert found their remains, the heads were missing, the bodies hollowed out with one clean bite. He buried them behind the barn and said nothing to the neighbors. He did not want to sound crazy. That is when his son woke up screaming. The boy said there was a face at his window, big, dark, and breathing against the glass. Robert told him it was a dream, but he could still see the terror in his son's eyes. That kind of fear does not come from imagination. Each night, the noises grew louder, heavy steps moving around the barn, deep breathing outside the windows. The family dog barked until its voice cracked, then whimpered and hid under the porch. One night, Robert went outside with a flashlight. The woods were quiet, but the air felt strange, thick, charged, like the moment before a lightning strike. Something moved out there just beyond the beam. But when he turned toward it, the sound stopped. Word spread quietly through the town. People mentioned strange lights above the trees, floating balls of light that drifted between the hills. Some said it was hunters, others said it was lightning. Robert stayed quiet. He did not care what anyone thought, and he just wanted to keep his family safe. By the end of June, they stopped sleeping through the night. Windows stayed locked, guns stayed loaded. Every sound felt like a warning, and then one night, just after midnight, the animals started screaming again. Robert reached for his flashlight, knowing before he even opened the door that whatever was out there this time, it was not running away. That night, the screams came again, louder this time. Robert jumped from bed, grabbed his gun, and ran outside with his sons right behind him. The flashlight beam cut across the field, and for a second they thought everything looked normal. Then the ducks near the pond started thrashing in the water. Wings flapped, splashes echoed, and the sound turned desperate, like something was tearing through them. He shouted, but the noise did not stop. When he aimed the flashlight toward the trees, he saw it, 2 glowing red eyes, staring straight back at him. They were high off the ground, too high for any animal. The shape behind them was large, thick, and hunched low, but the details were lost in shadow. He fired once. The blast rolled through the valley. What answered was not a growl. It was a scream, long, high, and sharp enough to freeze them in place. Whatever it was stumbled, then ran into the trees on 2 legs. It was not crawling, it was not running like a bear, it was upright. Robert stood there breathing hard, the gun shaking in his hands. His sons did not speak. Nobody moved until the flashlight beam started to flicker. Then they ran for the house. They sat in the kitchen until morning, the light still shaking on the table. No one said it out loud, but they all knew it. They had seen something that was not supposed to exist. The next night, Robert could not sleep. Around 2 in the morning, the dog started barking outside. It was not the usual bark. It was frantic, broken, like something had it trapped. Then it turned into a whimper. He grabbed his flashlight and stepped out onto the porch. The yard was silent. The beam swept across the grass until it caught movement under the push mower. The dog was trying to dig its way beneath it, tail between its legs, eyes wide and terrified. Robert whispered its name, but it would not come out. Then, from the far end of the yard, something exhaled, a deep, low breath, heavy enough to feel in his chest. He turned the flashlight toward the sound. The creature stood beside the wooden lift he had built to raise feed barrels. The top beam was 12 feet high, and its head nearly reached it. Thick, dark hair covered its body, and its mouth was wide with jagged teeth that caught the light. The red eyes burned brighter than before, fixed right on him. Robert froze. The smell was awful. Wet fur, rust, and something electric, like burnt metal. He could not move. For a moment it did not either. Then it tilted its head, almost curious, before stepping backward and melting into the darkness. He yelled for his sons. They rushed out. Armed and panicked, they piled into the pickup truck and swung it around toward the woods. The headlights hit something moving. A tall, shadowy figure cut across the field, running faster than any human could. The truck jumped forward. They followed it down the road, the engine growling, gravel spitting under the tires. The creature vanished between the trees. Then halfway down the road, the truck's engine died. No sputter, no warning, just dead silence. The headlights went out. The world turned black. For a few seconds, no one spoke. The only sound was breathing, fast, shaky. Robert turned the key again. Nothing. Then something brushed the side of the truck, slow, heavy, like a hand dragging across metal. The younger son started crying quietly. Robert tried the key again. The truck roared back to life on its own. He slammed the gas and sped home. Nobody looked out the windows. When they reached the house, they parked by the porch and sat there until sunrise. No one wanted to move. The engine ticked as it cooled, and the sound filled the silence. The next morning, Robert checked the truck. The fuel line was fine. The battery worked. There was no reason it should have died. That evening, a neighbor stopped by. Robert told him what had happened. The red eyes, the chase, the engine dying. The man did not laugh. He said his own boys had stopped camping in the backyard weeks ago after seeing something large move near the tree line. They thought it was a bear. But the look in his eyes said he did not believe that either. That night, as darkness fell, the woods around the farm felt heavier than ever. Every sound carried too far. Every shadow looked alive. The family stayed inside, lights on, guns ready, but nothing came. The air stayed still. The crickets did not sing. It felt like whatever was out there had stopped hunting and started watching. The next few days were silent. Too silent. The animals would not leave the barn, and even the birds seemed to vanish from the trees. For a moment, the family thought it might finally be over, but deep down, everyone knew the quiet meant something worse was coming. On June 29th, the family had planned to drive into town for a small music gathering. Robert and his sons played guitar on weekends, and it was supposed to be a normal night, something to clear their heads. But as they were getting ready, the ducks by the pond started flapping and screeching again. It was sudden, violent, as if something had dropped into the middle of them. Robert grabbed his shotgun and told everyone to stay inside. He stepped out onto the porch. The night was still. The air smelled like wet dirt and iron. Out by the tree line, a faint blue glow flickered between the trees. At first he thought it was a lantern, but it floated too smoothly, like it was moving under its own power. Then another appeared beside it, white this time, and another deep red. The lights drifted closer to the clearing, weaving between the trunks like they were alive. When Robert raised his gun, the glow faded. Then a second later, it blinked back on in a different spot. He called for his sons. They came running, one holding a rifle, the other a flashlight. When the beam hit the woods, the lights went dark again. For a heartbeat, there was nothing. Then one of the boys whispered, "Dad, look!" Pairs of eyes stared back from the shadows. Not one set. Dozens, all red, all fixed on the house. Robert's pulse pounded in his ears. He took aim, fired once, and the forest exploded with motion. Shadows darted between the trees, quick and silent. The family opened fire together, the night flashing with bursts of light. Each blast echoed across the valley. Then everything stopped. The smoke hung low over the field. The air smelled like burnt powder. The only sound was the tractor running near the barn. Then someone shouted, "By the pond!" They turned. A massive figure was crouched near the water, half hidden in the tall grass. It was tall, broad-shouldered, and swaying like it was injured. Robert fired again. The thing jerked backward and fell face-first into the pond. Ripples spread across the surface, then vanished. The flashlight beam caught nothing. No body, no movement. One of the boys said he saw something else, another pair of eyes moving near the trees, then another. The woods came alive with red glows, blinking on and off like signals. Robert shouted, "Back inside!" They ran for the house. The moment the door slammed shut, something heavy brushed against the outside wall. The boards groaned. The windows rattled. The youngest son screamed that he had seen a hand on the glass. For a second, the outline stayed there, a massive, long-fingered shape pressed flat against the window glass, then slid away. Inside, the family sat with their guns ready, the lights flickering overhead. Outside, footsteps circled the house, slow, deliberate, heavy. The dog barked until it started to choke, then went silent. Robert tried to steady his breathing. He counted each step until they stopped. Then came a sound none of them had heard before. A low hum like a machine buried underground. It vibrated through the walls, through their ribs, through the floor beneath their feet, and then it was gone. Hours passed before anyone moved. The night stretched forever. When dawn finally came, Robert stepped outside. The ground around the house was covered in strange prints, round, three-toed, 6 feet apart. They circled the porch and led into the field, but stopped halfway across as if the creature had simply disappeared mid-step. Later that morning, 2 neighbors came by after hearing the shots. One of them joked about kids playing pranks, but when they saw the twisted barbed wire near the fence line, neither spoke again. That evening, the family decided to stay awake. They climbed onto the roof with rifles and a lantern, keeping watch over the fields. The sky was clear. The moon hung low. Hours passed with nothing but the sound of wind. Then around midnight, the lights came back. 4 of them floated above the trees, evenly spaced, glowing red, blue, and yellow. They stayed perfectly still, humming faintly. Robert lifted the binoculars, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. They were not planes. They were not flares. They were cubes of light spinning slowly in place. Suddenly, one shot a beam straight down into the woods. The trees lit up like day. And from somewhere in that forest came the scream of a woman, loud, terrified, echoing across the fields. It lasted only a few seconds, then cut off as the lights blinked out. Everyone froze. The darkness that followed was so deep it felt solid. Then came movement in the field. Black figures running low to the ground, their outlines jerking like shadows with weight. Robert fired first. The others followed. Gunfire rolled like thunder, lighting up the shapes one by one. Every time the flash went off, the figures were closer. The lights returned, flickering fast, changing color as the creatures moved. Robert reloaded, shouting for his sons to keep shooting. Then, as suddenly as it started, the lights vanished. Silence. He waited, listening. Somewhere out there, something was still breathing. Then the blue glow returned. One single light weaving slowly through the trees. Robert watched it drift toward the fence line and stop. It floated there for a moment like it was watching them. Then it blinked out again, leaving nothing but the sound of the wind. That night, no one spoke. They sat together on the roof until the first light of dawn broke over the fields. The siege had only just begun. By morning, word had started to spread. Neighbors whispered about the gunfire, the lights, and the screams that carried across the fields. Some thought Robert was losing it. Others stayed quiet because they had seen strange things too. That same week, a researcher named Dennis showed up at the farm. He had been investigating UFO sightings across Ohio and heard about what people were calling the Rome incident. Robert did not care who he was as long as someone finally believed him. Dennis arrived with a small team carrying cameras, recorders, and notebooks. The men had that mix of curiosity and disbelief that people bring when they think they are walking into a ghost story. That changed fast. The first thing Dennis noticed were the footprints, round three-toed marks in the dirt spaced too far apart for any person or animal. Some went straight across, open fields, and then stopped mid-step like the creature had simply vanished. He crouched down, brushed the edge of one print, and said quietly, "These are not fake." Robert did not respond. He just pointed to the fence where the wires had been twisted apart like soft clay. The team spent the day writing down everything. They found trees split halfway up their trunks and patches of ground where the grass was pressed into perfect circles. Near the pond, Dennis spotted a section of earth that was burned black. The soil hardened like it had been hit by lightning, except there had not been a storm in weeks. That night, the men set up cameras and recorders around the house. Robert stayed awake with them, his son sleeping inside for the first time in days. The forest looked calm. The crickets sang again. For the first time in weeks, the air felt almost normal. Then, just after midnight, the lights came back. They appeared one by one between the trees. Soft at first, then bright enough to paint the fields in color. Red, blue, white, moving slowly, deliberately. Dennis whispered, "Don't move." Everyone froze. The cameras rolled. The lights drifted closer, and that low hum started again, a vibration they could feel in their chests, more than hear with their ears. Then, without warning, a bright flash exploded through the woods, turning the night into day. The entire forest glowed for a few seconds, white and clean, like a spotlight from the sky. Then, darkness. One of the cameras jammed. Another stopped recording completely. Dennis fumbled with the flashlight, but it flickered and died. When it came back on, something was standing near the edge of the woods, a tall shape, blacker than the trees behind it. Two red eyes opened, catching the light. Robert raised his gun, but Dennis grabbed his arm. "Wait." The creature did not move. The air around it shimmered faintly as if it was not completely solid. Then it tilted its head slow, curious, and turned away. They heard it step twice, heavy and wet, before disappearing into the dark. Everyone stood there, silent. Dennis turned to his team. "Did you get that?" The cameraman shook his head. The film jammed. Dennis wrote in his notebook, his hands shaking. "It has mass," he scribbled. "It reacts to light. It is not a reflection." The next day, the men searched the area where they had seen it. No body, no fur, no sign of blood, just more footprints. But these were different. They were larger, deeper, and the soil around each one had a strange twist pattern. The grass bent in perfect spirals. Dennis said it looked magnetic, like something had pulled the blades clockwise around the print. Robert did not understand what that meant. He just knew whatever it was could walk right up to his home and vanish whenever it wanted. 2 days later, the sheriff's office sent 2 deputies to the farm. They took notes, walked the fields, and left shaking their heads. The report they filed listed it as suspicious activity. That night, the team decided to stay one more time. They climbed onto the roof with their rifles and cameras, waiting for the lights to return. For hours, nothing happened. Then, just before 2 a.m., the hum came back. 4 lights floated above the trees again, red, yellow, blue, and white, spinning slowly in formation. Dennis watched them through binoculars, trying to keep his hands steady. Then one of the lights shot a narrow white beam down into the woods. The forest glowed, bright enough to see the bark on every tree. And then came the sound. Not an animal, not a machine, but a scream. It sounded like a woman, long, sharp, desperate. Robert's sons came running out with rifles. The lights above flickered once, twice, and vanished. Silence dropped over the fields. The men scanned the tree line, but the forest was empty. Then something moved near the barn, a tall, dark figure slipping between the shadows. Robert fired. The flash lit up the field, but the shape did not fall. It turned slow and deliberate and melted back into the trees. Dennis kept writing. He did not try to explain it, he just wrote what he saw. By morning, everyone was pale and quiet. They had seen the lights up close, seen the eyes again, felt the hum in their bones, but none of it made sense. Dennis packed his gear and told Robert they would return in a few days. He did not promise answers. He just said, "It's not over yet." A few quiet days passed after Dennis left, but the silence did not feel right. The family moved through their chores like sleepwalkers, never staying far from the house. Even the animals seemed to know something was coming. The dog refused to leave the porch. The horses would not go near the woods. Then on the night of July 1st, it all started again. It began with a faint hum, the same low vibration that seemed to come from inside the ground. The windows buzzed, the lamps flickered, and the air took on that strange metallic taste. Robert and his sons ran outside with flashlights and guns. The woods were lit again. 4 glowing cubes hung above the tree line, evenly spaced, slowly changing color from red to blue to yellow. They floated there in silence, perfectly still. Dennis and his team returned just in time to see it, cameras rolling. They climbed onto the roof for a better view. One of the lights shot down a narrow white beam cutting through the forest. Everything beneath it glowed silver. Then a scream cut through the night, high, human, and terrified. It echoed across the fields, stopped, then came again from another direction. No one could tell where it was coming from. The cubes flickered once, then disappeared. The darkness that followed was total. For a few seconds, no one moved. Then from the tree line came movement, black shapes darting between the trees, fast and deliberate. Their outlines were wrong, too tall, too thin, moving in ways that did not make sense. Robert fired first. His sons followed. Muzzle flashes lit the field. The shapes scattered, then came back together, their eyes glowing red in the flashes. Dennis yelled for them to stop wasting bullets, but it was already too late. Shells hit the ground in a steady rhythm. Every time the flashes lit up the woods, the figures were closer. Then, just as suddenly, everything stopped. The shapes froze. The lights in the trees blinked out. The hum went quiet. For a heartbeat, the world held still. Then the house shook. Something massive hit the side wall hard enough to rattle the windows. Boards groaned. Dust fell from the ceiling. One of the boys screamed. That something was on the roof. Robert looked up and saw a dark outline moving along the ridge, heavy enough to bend the beams. He fired through the roof. The kick jolted him backward. The roof went silent. Dennis ran outside with a flashlight. He swung the beam upward just in time to catch the last of the shadows slipping over the far side of the house. The light flashed, and for half a second they all saw it clearly. Black fur, long arms, and eyes the color of burning coals. Then it was gone. The men stood there in the yard waiting for it to come back. It did not, but the hum did. Louder this time. The 4 lights reappeared, over the trees, brighter than before. They floated for a moment. Then, one by one, began to spin faster and faster, until their colors blurred together into a single red glow that washed across the field. The entire sky looked like it was on fire. Robert shouted for everyone to get down. The glow pulsed once like a heartbeat and vanished. Silence again. The only sound was the tractor running near the barn. The key still in it. Engine still running, though no one had started it. They turned it off. It started itself again. Dennis stared at it, whispering, "It's not mechanical." That was when the red glow came back, not above them this time, but drifting through the field like a floating ember. It moved low to the ground, weaving between the weeds until it stopped halfway to the tree line. Everyone watched. The ember changed shape, dimming, shrinking until it looked like a small animal crouched in the grass. Robert took a step forward, raising his gun. Dennis hissed, "Wait!" The flashlight caught it for just a second. It was not glowing anymore. It had wings, feathers, a face like an owl. But then it stood up on 4 legs and ran fast back into the woods. They fired. Nothing hit. Dennis kept the flashlight steady on the trees. "They change," he said quietly. "They want us to see them." Robert did not answer. He just kept staring at the dark line of trees. For the rest of the night, they saw movement everywhere. Shadows crossing the fields, shapes ducking behind hay bales, the sound of something running circles around the barn, always just out of reach. Then near dawn came the last sighting. A single pair of red eyes appeared near the fence, unmoving. The body behind them was huge, taller than a man, maybe 12 feet. It stepped forward once into the flashlight beam. Black hair, long arms, shoulders broad as a doorway. The thing stood there watching them. Robert fired. The creature turned sideways, slow and calm, and vanished into the fog. A deep roar rolled out from the woods, low, deep, shaking the air itself. The echo lasted nearly a minute, then silence. When the sun came up, the ground near the fence was pressed flat. Deep prints led halfway across the field, then stopped. No body, no blood, nothing but a pattern in the grass, swirled clockwise like something had spun the blades into knots. Dennis wrote his final note for the night. "They don't run, they withdraw." Nobody said a word. For the rest of that day, no one slept. The family sat on the porch staring at the empty field, waiting for the lights to come back. They did not, but no one believed it was over. The next few nights passed without a sound. No lights, no screams, no movement. The family tried to convince themselves it was over, but nobody believed it. They still kept their guns nearby, slept in shifts, and jumped at every noise the house made. Dennis returned a week later, determined to try one more experiment. He brought another researcher with him, a man named Willard, who specialized in animal behavior. They wanted proof, something physical they could record, something that could not be dismissed as imagination. They arrived before sunset, bringing cameras, tape recorders, and 3 live rabbits in metal cages. Willard said predators could not resist the sound of a rabbit in distress, so he played a recording, a loop of terrified squeals. The sound cut through the fields like a knife, echoing over the grass and fading into the woods. Robert hated it. Every cry made his skin crawl, but Dennis told him it was necessary. They tied the cages down with thick parachute cords, each able to hold 1,200 pounds. Then they waited for hours. Nothing happened. The sound kept playing over and over. The night air felt heavy and strange, thick with the same metallic smell that always came before the lights. Then, just before 10, the first red glow appeared among the trees. 6 pairs of eyes blinked to life at once. Everyone went silent. The eyes stayed there, motionless, watching the field. The rabbits screamed again, the sound echoing off the barn. The eyes seemed to react, shifting slightly, shining brighter. Dennis whispered, "Don't move." The glow stayed for several minutes, then vanished all at once. No running, no sound, just gone. No one slept that night. The group took turns watching from the porch, but the woods never moved again. The next morning, the first thing Dennis noticed was the silence. Not a single bird, not even a fly. He and Willard walked slowly to the field. Robert followed behind them. When they reached the traps, all 3 men stopped. The first cage was untouched, the second was empty. The third had been flipped over and crushed inward. The thick cord that held it had snapped clean in half, frayed and blackened at the ends. There was no blood, no fur, no rabbit tracks leading away. Just deep marks in the dirt, wide and heavy, like something massive had stood there and lifted the cages with ease. Dennis crouched, running his hand over the broken cord. 1,200 pounds, he whispered. It tore through it like paper. Robert did not speak. He just kept staring at the empty space where the rabbits had been. They searched the area for another hour but found nothing. The ground around the site was smooth, as if something had burned the top layer of soil away. The grass nearby was swirled into spirals. Again, all turning the same direction. When they returned to the porch, Dennis sat down hard and did not speak for a long time. Finally, he said, "Whatever this is, it's not just physical, it's intelligent." That was the last night Dennis stayed on the farm. He packed his notes, the broken cords, and the crushed cage into his truck. Before leaving, he told Robert to keep his doors locked, keep records of anything else that happened, and call him if the lights returned. Robert nodded, though he already knew he would not. He never wanted to see those woods again. By late summer, the strange activity faded completely. The family tried to rebuild what was left of their routine. Chickens were replaced, fences mended, but no one went near the tree line anymore. Visitors came by sometimes asking about the stories they had heard, the gunfire, the lights, the creatures. Robert stopped answering questions. He said it was just bad luck, just a wild animal. But at night, when the house was quiet, he still kept a gun near his bed. Years passed. The story became a local legend. People talked about the Rome farm like it was a ghost story told around a fire, but there were photos and footprints and official reports, proof that something had happened there. Dennis went on to publish everything he had recorded in a book called Night Siege. He wrote about the lights, the footprints, and the strange electrical failures. He said it was not one event, but many connected somehow, like different parts of the same intelligence. No one could explain it, not then, not now. When Dennis died years later, his files were scattered between libraries and private collections. Some say his original tapes still exist. Hours of interviews, strange noises, and the sound of Robert's voice shaking as he described what he saw. In one of those recordings near the end, Robert says a single line that stuck with everyone who has ever heard it. "If it ever comes back," he said, "I just hope it doesn't remember me." More than 40 years later, the story of the Rome farm is still one of the strangest ever recorded in Ohio. The land is quiet now. The fences are gone, the barn collapsed, and weeds cover the open fields where the lights once floated. But people who live nearby still talk about it. Some swear that on clear nights a faint glow drifts low over the tree line. Red at first, then blue, then gone. Most shrug it off. Others do not go near that property at all. Dennis's book went out of print decades ago, and much of his research disappeared after his death. What is left are fragments, a few photographs, handwritten notes, and police reports labeled suspicious activity. They sit in small archives rarely opened. For something that was witnessed by so many, it is almost as if the story was meant to fade. Maybe that is part of it. Maybe whatever happened there was not supposed to be remembered. Some people say the lights were experimental aircraft. Others believe the creatures were connected to Bigfoot sightings or to the wave of UFO encounters that swept the Midwest in the early 1980s. But the truth is simpler and harder to accept. Nobody knows. Every explanation falls apart under the weight of the evidence. A torn-apart deer, a truck that died and started on its own, footprints that began and ended in the middle of an open field, a sound that could shake a house without touching it. All of it happened. None of it made sense. Robert never gave another interview. He moved away, started over, and stopped talking about that summer. Those who knew him said he was never the same. Sometimes he would wake in the middle of the night, step onto his porch, and stare at the woods like he was listening for something. And maybe he was, because whatever came to that farm in 1981 did not just visit. It watched, it tested, and then it left. But the question that still haunts everyone who has heard the story is not what it was. It is why it stopped. Maybe it finished what it came to do. Or maybe it is still out there watching someone else right now. This is the story of the night siege of 1981, a true event that still refuses to make sense even after all these years. If you made it this far, tell me in the comments what you think those lights were. And if you want more stories that blur the line between reality and the impossible, make sure you are subscribed because somewhere out there, another story is waiting.